Bonjour. This is the French guy from Voyage Francaise, and I'm continuing to speak concerning strategies of passing the DELF A1 exam. For this specific video, I want to speak concerning how to pass the production oral section of the exam, which is the speaking part. Now, for the speaking part, there are different sections as well. But the section that I would like to speak concerning for this specific video is the entretien dirigé, which is the structured interview. And now for the structured interview, basically is the part whereby the examiner is the one who's going to be posing questions to you, the candidate, or whoever is going to be writing the exam. So I would like to share 2 or 3 strategies that have brought good results, tremendous results, especially with the students that I've taught. So the first thing that I'd like to speak about is the strategy of thinking in French. Thinking in French. Now, I do know that especially for someone who's writing A1, on average, most probably when you have been given an assignment or when you're trying to speak, I do know that chances are you're probably trying to translate in your mind. I know you're probably trying to translate whatever you want to say from English to French. But this strategy sort of goes against this thought or way of thinking that you may have already been applying. And the first point that I like to say is that it is extremely essential for someone to be able to think in French. Because when you think in English, the challenge is that the more you think in English, the more time you are going to take to translate what you are saying or what you are planning to say. So let's say, for example, I would like to give an example. So let's say, for example, for the entretien dirigé, let's say, for example, the first question that examiner gives is parler de ta famille. Speak about your family. Now, I know most probably one of the first things that can actually come to the mind of anyone is, okay, so I know I'm going to speak about my family. And you're probably going to be thinking of all of these things in English before you then try to speak it in French. So as you're trying to think about, okay, what do I say about my family? Okay, my brother is 5 years old, and now in your mind, you're now trying to translate that sentence of, okay, how do I say my brother is 5 years old in French? And then mon frère est, and then you're now trying to think, okay, which verb should I also get to include in the sentence? Now, all of this is a lot of time ticking. It's a lot of time which is ticking. And the more the time ticks, the more you're taking time to respond, which will also affect the time you have been given for this section of the exam. So the first strategy that I have for you, I know it may be a bit of a challenge, but it is so important, especially it is important and applicable if you are able to practice it at least days or even a few weeks before the exam date. So the first strategy, as I'm saying, is think in French. Think in French. Whatever sentence you're planning to say, think of the sentence in French. The same way that I would ask you a question in your native language. The fact that it will probably take you milliseconds or microseconds for you to respond is because you are speaking comfortably in that native language. But if I was to ask you another question in a language which is not your native language, probably you would take 2 or 3 or 4 more seconds to try to translate your response from your native language, or should I say the language that you're used to, into the language that you're expected to speak in or to write in. So for this strategy, I know it's difficult and it may take time, but it's so essential that in your day-to-day work, whether you're taking a walk or you're at work, you're writing, or you're listening to music, try to think in French. It's going to take time, and I do know that it actually brings some strain in your mind. But the strategy of thinking in French, it helps a lot. But take it a step at a time. Whether you wake up in the morning and you're planning to open the window, just think of that sentence of opening the window in French. Or let's say you're about to have breakfast and you're looking at the food in your plate. And because you already know the food in your own native language, try to think in French about what you're eating. Or if you're planning to do certain tasks during the day, try to think of those tasks in French. because the main challenge is once the exam comes and you're now in this structured interview section of the exam, when a question is posed to you, and if you start translating your response in your mind from whatever your native language might be, in this case, I would like to use the example of English. The more you take time translating from English to French, it will definitely take you time to respond, which can be a disadvantage to you because of the time you have been given in the exam. So strategy number one, do your best to think in French. It will definitely help you to minimize the time that you spend during this section, and you'll actually have more time to speak. Now, for the second strategy that I'd like to speak concerning this section of the exam is being able to ask the examiner to repeat the question. Now, when you ask the examiner to repeat the question, of course, you are able to pose your question in French in whatever way that you may be comfortable with. Répétez, s'il vous plaît. Please repeat, right? When you ask the examiner to repeat the question, basically you are sort of giving yourself more time to have certain words or to have certain structures formulated within your mind concerning the response that you're going to give. But at the same time, of course, do be so comfortable to ask the examiner to repeat the question. And even if you do not understand the question, feel free again to tell the examiner that you do not understand the question. Je ne comprends pas. So feel free to ask the question. Feel free to ask the examiner to repeat the question, and at the same time, feel free to inform the examiner that you do not understand the question. And then the examiner will definitely ask you another question, which is most probably very simple. Strategy number three, keep your responses short and simple. If you've already seen the previous video upload that I did, you'll notice that I had mentioned this strategy already before, whereby I spoke and said, keep your sentences short as possible. Keep your sentences as short as possible and focus upon what the examiner has asked. I know there is this temptation that we all have, and I used to have this same temptation as well, whereby I want to speak so many verbs in the same sentence, and I want my sentence to be so long. The possibilities of you making of verbal errors gets so enormous. It gets so huge. But the more you're able to keep your responses as short as possible, using verbs that you're very familiar with as well, it will then help you to then keep answering the questions according to what they are asking. At the same time, it will keep your errors much less. So I do encourage you to think in French. I do encourage you as well to ask the examiner to repeat the question, or to ask the examiner or to actually inform the examiner that you didn't understand the question. At the same time, keep your responses as short as possible. So for the first strategy which I mentioned, this is just a repetition because this is a strategy that actually works from the beginning, the point that you're starting to learn in French. Begin to think in French. Whatever amount of information you've learned or studied, the more you think in French, the more you find yourself being able to respond quicker and to think faster in French. And this will definitely assist you so much in the exam, whether you're in A1 or even in other levels of French as well, whether it's A1 or A2 going on above. If you're doing the DELF exam, the more you're able to think in French and the more you are able to expose yourself to French information, it will then help you to pass. So please stay tuned to Voyage Francaise channel on YouTube. There are more strategies coming concerning passing the DELF exam. Merci beaucoup.